Blair to me has always been that fun character to rock, having satisfying skill casts but not having the over-the-top damage like others, meaning that he's never been that top pick to use in most forms of content. Nevertheless, he has had some solid builds in the past, with Backdraft and Killer Recipe being some of his top picks. Unfortunately, due to how Axion behaves, weapon builds have taken a slight hit in viability unless your name is Serena or Glay, and Killer Recipe was never much of a mass mobbing build, leaving us to need to try something different, something new, and definitely something stronger. So in today's video we'll be breaking down my current recommended Axion and Purge build for Blair, explaining the skill rotation and how it all comes together. We've got the modules, weaponry, Arche Tuning, trigger mods and components all to come, so as always, if that sounds good to you, what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. So before we do get started, I just want to take a minute to address the build name of Big Meat. Now, true story, as we all know, Blair's Killer Recipe red mod changes his skill 1 to fire meatballs, which really are just mini fireballs at the end of the day. So by putting on the red mod of Truly Deadly Cuisine for this build, and making your skill 4 to be an even larger fireball than normal, I wanted to call this the Big Meatball build, but apparently the word ball is a banned word, and yet Big Meat is fine, so I guess that just kinda stuck. Now with that sorted, let's cover the main rotation of this build. Unlike other popular descendants, Blair requires setup to be able to get going, and this is easily done via his flame zones using skill 1. Now placing this down on the floor per cast will offer some nice crowd control and DPS, with each zone being its own damage instance. And not only that, we'll also be gaining plus 5% base crit rate on all of our skills per zone up to a total of 5. Now while more zones can exist past that number, we are still going to be capped at our max benefit of 5, meaning 25% more crit rate on our original 20% for a total of 45% at max ramp up. We can turn these flame zones into even more boosts using our skill 2 Extinguish, recovering up to 40% MP, providing us with a 25% more movement speed, and a 6% skill power modifier per flame zone, meaning 30% more modifier at max stacks. So spamming our skill 1 gives us damage on the floor, but also stacks up more crit rate, while our 2 provides us with the MP recovery and the speed, but so far there's no real big payoff. Well, that's where our red mod and skill 4 come into the equation, with Truly Deadly Cuisine taking our massive fireball and making it one big chunky damage number. Sporting over 17,000 skill power modifier, along with Blair's ability to easily hit that crit rate cap and take advantage of the larger crit multipliers, this thing can get nutty, and I do mean over 200 million on the Eye of Sauron's inside Axion planes, one-shotting it and shutting off its benefit. This can also one-shot the first phase of some Axion bosses and two-shot their second phases if it's done right, making this a very powerful build to rock if you can dunk that fireball. So you've heard the sales pitch, but what about the goods? Well, let's take a look at the modules and break it all down for how this comes together. Now, as I spoke about before, the red mod of choice here is going to be Truly Deadly Cuisine, turning our skill 4 from one that spreads out flame zones for constant damage to that of a single damage instant but more for killing power, now rocking 17,161% skill power into a 4 meter radius. Now, while I do think that cooldown on this is something that Nexon should reduce, similar to what VS had got not too long ago for the launch of Season 3, it's easily one of the hardest hitting skills in the game and makes short work of bosses and elites alike. So with that now covered, let's start it off with the Axion and main mobbing build, as we do have a mod change if you plan to rock those purge levels. Now the primary focus will be around those flame zones and getting the most damage out of them, while also giving us the cooldown needed for spam. By running a crit package, skill power and modifier onto the full cooldown cap, we can spam all of our abilities out, make mobbing so easy that you'll think you're possibly playing a fire-based Inez, although slightly more geared towards taking down those bigger threats. So let's start with the crit package. As Blair ramps up to 45% base crit rate through his flame pit, it means that we only need a total of 122.2% crit rate increase to be able to hit that cap of 100%. Now, as we can rely on the Arche Tuning to help us out a little bit here, that means we can leave behind skill insight and run the other 3 of skill concentration, emergency measures, and front lines, providing the most crit damage multiplier boost, while also contributing 92.3% to that crit rate, leaving us only 29.9% left to go. But the crits won't be doing us much without skill power or modifier, so we'll be grabbing both focus on mods here, and also helping us to hit that cooldown cap, with focus on fire being our skill power boost, and focus on dimension being that of our modifier. But that's not all for the cooldown, as we'll be grabbing the normal duo of Nimble Fingers and MP Conversion, so in total we're up to 74.3% skill cooldown before we start talking about gear and tuning. Now range is also vital for the build to perform effectively, so we'll be using one slot for skill expansion, which will work nicely with the Arche Tuning tree and our Inversion Reinforcement for even more skill range boosts. And while it won't necessarily hit the range cap, it will get us quite close, and typically is more than enough for what we actually need it for. Now for the penultimate mod, HP is going to be critical if you're planning to run Axion, especially as the build does require the first 4 Flame Zones cast to really get going. Now as it grants us the most HP without a major downside, we'll be grabbing HP amplification here, giving us a very nice HP pool for us to be able to work from. And then lastly we have our flex spot, allowing us to rock a couple of modules depending on the playstyle and obviously the content you're going into. So for Axion, I'm personally going to recommend that you go for Decimator, as the trash mobs will do wonders for your Flame Zone multipliers, turning them from stat boost into inefficient area denial zones. But if you are going for Purge, then it just has to be Hyper Focus. With the enemies there being resistant to fire, having a crit damage proc on the Hyper Focus mod is more than enough to take out the yellow bars with a single fireball, and also make Greg wish that he was never actually cloned. For Axion and general mobbing, I will say for the most part, it is going to be insane overkill if you do go for Hyper Focus, plus it can be a little bit awkward to proc all of the time, but in Purge, where enemies are going to be grouped together along a set path, then the mod cannot be beat for damage. And with that just leaves us with the trigger mod of choice, which, while technically Arcade Leak would be a really strong option for our Flame Zones, plus the fact that we can top our MP up at will with Extinguish, it's still quite difficult in practice to maintain this at times, and it will cause you to run dry while you mob. So because of this, we can actually go with the next best option, which will then help our skill 4 as well, and that is going to be Power Beyond, which is more than just a skill power boost in this build, as it can also provide the tow effect to enemies after the 4th zone is placed on the ground, dragging enemies over to your Flame Zones rather than requiring you to go to them and to be able to place it nearby or directly on top of them. Now as each Flame Zone is its own instance of damage, you can choose to stack these up in one location and let it go to work, or you can actually use the tow to group enemies together and finish them off with a powered up fireball from your 4, which is then going to instantly delete everything in that pack. Both methods do wonders for this build, and it is a fantastic way to mob efficiently as well as quickly. Now the Reactor is going to be crucial to this build, helping to both fuel our cooldowns to hit cap, as well as being able to bump up all of that juicy damage that we'll be throwing around. Now as his offensive skills are fire and dimension based, we'll be going for the Burning Phase Reactor, giving us more oomph when we need it. So for our weapons of choice, there isn't much in the way of a stat stick for Blair to use and abuse due to his dimension based skills. So because of this, we'll instead be opting for our makeshift stat stick of Kingsguard Lance, especially inside a Purge, or alternatively we can go for a tactical rifle to go for something like Secret Garden, or even a hand cannon to be able to go for Peacemaker, something to be able to help you out with the movement side of things if you do plan on using that inside of Axion. We'll talk about all the guns a little bit later on in the video, but for now, these are going to be the mountings that we're after. Now for our substats though, nothing beats cooldown and crit damage. Cooldown is going to be essential to hit that 90% cap in combination with the rest of the build, and crit damage will be amplifying everything that we do that much more, as Blair easily hits that 100% crit rate. Just settle for nothing less. Now before we go into the recommended components that I've been running and for all the footage that you can see in the background, I do want to take a second and acknowledge that Slayer set is a great option here. Because we'll be towing enemies with our Power Beyond, that will also help us to proc that MP recovery for sustain, but on top of that the generic skill power is also pretty tasty, which is going to be bouncing off of our fire skill power bucket to massively increase our DPS. Now if you're also after the hardest hitting fireballs, then Slayer would be the best option, but going down that route does mean that you are going to miss out on the cooldown, which then makes it harder to spam those skills away. So that instead brings us to the current recommended loadout and what I personally use, and is more than enough damage to be able to throw around, and that is going to be a 2-piece of the Hunter set for the cooldown and 2-piece for the Major set, which is ideal for providing us even more generic skill power. Now while this is a smaller boost of generic skill power over that of the Slayer set, it's still just nice enough to make our skills potent, as well as being able to provide us that last little bit of skill cooldown that we need to hit that 90% cap, which is ideal for a 7-second fireball to head enemies' way that when they would have been towed, or for when we actually need that boss dismantled. For our substats, we'll be rocking the typical skill build set here of maximum rolls into HP and MP, along with all of that MP recovery that we can get, and then similar for the core side of things, we'll once again be going for that generic set of max HP, as well as defense on every single piece. So on to the weaponry, and as we mentioned for the Reactor part, Kingsguard Lance is making its way into the build. Similar to how we actually use it for Viessa, we'll be relying on the Lance to help us with trash mobs, apply enhanced focus rounds on groups of enemies, trigger our hyper focus crit damage if you choose to run that mod, and then lastly help us with crowd control, as we'll also be rocking chill on this bad boy. Now for the modules, we'll be rocking the same as we do for Viessa and Sharon, piling into crit rate, chill attack and fire rate. And if you haven't built your lance up already, you can get away with just better insight, insight focus and chill enhancement and the fire rate up mod, meaning that you only just need an NG activator to be up and running with this weapon. Everything else just kind of makes it a little bit better. For our core slots, we'll be rocking max into fire rate, 1 firearm attack and 1 chill attack, and we're also messing about with the roll into purple, going for a bonus firearm attack to Legion of Darkness. This should help the lance feel a little bit stronger when going inside of Purge 10, and it's going to be giving it a purpose outside of purely just crowd control. Substat wise, we have mixed this up a little, rocking into crit still, but we've replaced the firearm attack and chill attack nodes for attribute status trigger rate, which is going to be ideal for applying that frostbite a little bit more often, as well as a roll into firearm attack versus Legion of Darkness, ready to get the benefit from the cores. Now while this won't be necessarily the most deadly lance setup, it will be the best in slot for a stat and debuff stick for the use inside of Purge, and at the end of the day, while Kingsguard Lance is a perfectly fine gun, it is just primarily a stat stick for us to use, and it also leaves the damage dealing to Blair's skills. Alternatively, if we're just inside of Axion and not using Hyper Focus, we can actually use a good movement stat stick like Peacemaker or Secret Garden, basically anything that has the option to be able to have 3 yellow core slots. Now as we can't really benefit from any other stat sticks right now, movement is king and will help you navigate the levels and complete those faster. For my Secret Garden build, we'll be running 2 sprint speed cores and a grapple core, with the rest basically being null and void as we won't be firing the gun. For modules, the only real one to slot in here will be Brisk Walk, which will be then helping you out even further as you start taking out those enemies. For our Arche Tuning, we have a fairly simple tree looking to boost our HP and our skill damage through the use of skill ranges, crit rate and damage, and cooldown, and even a mutant cell boosting our damage against tougher enemies. Kicking things off, we head downwards for the first 2 nodes, picking up a little bit of extra HP, which is ideal for Axion and taking a few more hits. After this, we can then do the main journey and head right, picking up boost to skill cost reductions and range, then heading upwards for more skill power and cooldown. We'll branch out left and right, with left being our crit route, grabbing the full package of crit rate and damage, and right being the route for even more skill power as well as our mutant cell. Speaking of, our mutant cell of choice here will be Burn Vulnerability, granting us extra generic skill power as we start hitting burning enemies, which is ideal for our flame zones as well as our fireball for dealing with end of level bosses. Now due to the crowd control that we have via the lance and the toes from Power Beyond, I did try out Arche Overheat Shield 2, which did have a little bit of use, but it felt pretty inconsistent and not ideal for Axion, but it could be used inside of Purge as a bit of a riskier option. Personally, I'd side with Burn Vulnerability, but Overheat does technically do work inside of this build, and it can be used if you want to wish to challenge yourself inside of the DPS. For our Inversion Reinforcement, we're once again trying to find the ideal slots for a skill build, with the caveat being Blair can resupply his own MP on demand, so selective neurostimulation is pretty much not needed here. Now as for the 3 slots that we do want, we'll be grabbing Ammo System, which is going to be a great option if you do run that Kingsguard Lance, so you're never really caught short-handed or unable to deploy a lance, and seeing as we'll be using this either for crowd control or for proccing a hyper-focus mod, it's safe to say having a faster reload would make using this gun much easier. And speaking of using the gun though, as we want to shred that attribute resistance, we will want to grab a focus round on the next row, and as we have chill enhancement on the lance already, we can boost up its damage and its mob clearing effectiveness by rocking even more chill focus rounds here too. With that now selected, we are going to be applying enhanced focus rounds on all enemies within the radius of the lance, allowing us to do even more damage with our skills. And then lastly, and you do have a bit of flexibility here, with some other node options being things like Emergency Antibody or Deploy Hardened Shell, but the main one that I've opted for here is Selective Cellular Stimulation, which does provide us with HP regen, which in combination with our fellow doing the exact same thing, will offer us plenty of healing while we're doing the work. And with all that out of the way, that wraps it up for my go-to Axion and Purge builds for Blair, and while this build can handle everything that Axion can throw its way right now, we did get an info drop that Blair is due to receive some buffs potentially next week with Ultimate Luna dropping, so this can only get even better. Blair has a few strong builds already in his arsenal, but if you're after the best right now, you won't want any other build. And so this is a section I want to hear from you. What are your current thoughts on Blair? Do you think any of his red mod builds need even more help? And then lastly, what are your current thoughts on Season 3 so far? Let me know all that and more down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. As I always say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.